But before doing so, I'll give you a quick intro on Pairmill. We are a performance marketing agency. We help companies scale and find customers on paid search and paid social channels. Our sort of niche has been to work with very fast growing companies, spending in the sort of hundreds of thousands of dollars a month range. And we have sort of end-to-end services from media buying to creative production to conversion rate optimization and to tracking and attribution modeling and really growth analytics. So you're actually going to probably see information about all of those things in here and all the learnings that we've sort of had over the past year or so as the regulatory landscape has shifted and changed. And I'll pass it on to Dino.
Hi, thank you all for making time to join us today. Yeah, I feel like you set a pretty good stage and I can just share my screen and jump into it. Can you see the full screen presentation of the slides?
Yes.
Perfect. So what are we going to go over today? So first of all, the effects of the HIPAA guidelines on paid advertising, mostly social, what your options are for tracking on-site conversions events within HIPAA guidelines, how HIPAA has made testing impossible, kinda, at least like a bit more complicated, then a step-by-step guide, what we do when we want to test within HIPAA guidelines, data analysis examples before and after, how to analyze data afterwards, and just a couple of notes from our creative directors on how to produce performant creatives ethically. So I just want to mention that even though I'm talking a lot about testing here, how to set up a testing campaign or how to measure when testing, this applies to evergreen campaigns. I just like to use creative testing as an example because that's where measuring data is extremely important. And why creative testing and not a different testing? Well, it's paid social advertising and it's a visual platform, so it kind of just makes sense. So let's kick off with the HIPAA effect. Who is affected by this? The short answer is everybody who is in an advertising space, who is advertising on any search or social platform. None of the, let's say, popular platforms have signed the documentation they will not be tracking / selling customer information. So everybody is being monitored, let's say. What does this mean for you? Can you advertise on these platforms? Well, the short answer is yes, as long as no patient information is being uploaded to the platform. The concern here is, let's just talk about Meta selling the patient data, and that's just unacceptable. So what this means for you is that any pixel tracking that collects PII or personally identifiable information should not be enabled. Even data that doesn't include personalized, identifiable information may become protected. So even though we are going to be talking about general best practices, it's always very important to do your own due diligence in your specific, let's just say, product. What are your options when it comes to tracking? Nima, would you like to jump into this one as you're slightly better with tracking, or do you want me to cover this?
No, I can go through it. So we actually did a full webinar just on this slide. So I can, if people are interested, I'm happy to send over the recording of that. But to give you an idea, there are different companies who have basically interpreted the guidance differently. And so we're seeing these sort of three different approaches. So number one is what I'm calling the most privacy-centric option. And that's basically no pixel tracking on the web or mobile app itself, and no backend conversions being sent to Meta or Google using their conversions API endpoints. This is obviously the worst performance outcomes because we're basically cutting off the feedback loop from these ad networks. And as you know, these ad networks are mostly machine learning based targeting systems. And so if they don't have the feedback loop, it's much, much harder to find the right cost dynamics on them. But that is an option that we've seen people pick. And there are solutions on how you can sort of still achieve some performance outcomes that are reasonable, but it just makes things much harder. Number 2 path is what I'm calling the middle ground path. So, no pixel tracking still on the front end, so completely dark there, but still sending back-end conversions to the ad networks with limited metadata. And by limited metadata, I'm really talking about ensuring that we're not sending the metadata that are deemed to be PII or PHI. So things like IP address maybe should not be sent anymore. Maybe user agent is not being sent, but you're sending things like the Facebook click ID in order to help them attribute to some extent. So that click ID is fully anonymous, generated by Meta. So whenever someone's clicking on something on the front end on the app, you will be able to grab that click ID, carry it to your backend, and then send it. So it does take a bit of engineering work to do this version of things, but at the very least, you're ensuring that there is no sort of pixel on the site, and whenever there are pixels on the site, you can't control what Meta is sort of consuming from the user when they're on your site, and that's sort of why some of our clients have taken this path. And so this is obviously not as good as the third one we're going to talk about, but it has better performance outcomes than zero feedback signals going to the system. So Facebook click ID is one path, Google click ID is another. For Google, Bing has a similar sort of ID you can pass on called MS click ID, and so on. And then the third option is having some privacy enabled, but sort of following the guidance almost to the dot. And so what that really means is that they've been very clear about the difference between authenticated versus unauthenticated pages. So this option is effectively having the pixel on the unauthenticated pages. So think your landing pages, your home page, and so on, having the Meta pixel and the Google pixels there. And then the moment the user is sort of giving PII onto your form and so on, you stop effectively tracking on the front end and moving to back-end conversions only, with a sort of similar approach of only sending the metadata that you deem are well within reason when it comes to your boundaries in terms of privacy. And so a big disclaimer here is that we're not lawyers here. This is just what we're seeing across our accounts. And we've not made these decisions other than explaining the different sort of aspects of these things to general counsels of our clients, who've then made decisions based on their understanding of how these systems work and sort of where they think companies should fall on the basis of that. And so obviously this third option is probably we're going to get the best performance outcomes, but we're probably in a sort of legal gray area. And the reason I say that is because whenever you have a pixel, like Facebook's pixel or Google's pixel, on your site, they, by the nature of how the internet works, are able to consume the IP address of that person. And so you can't block that. There's no way for you to block that. With conversions APIs, you can block that because you have full control on the back end. But the browser, like Chrome or Firefox or Safari, will always send the person's IP address with any tracking you do on with a pixel. And so the legal gray area here is actually the IP address. It seems like that at least a couple of lawsuits have sort of tipped over on IP address can be considered PII, but there seems to be some nuances. So that's why it's a gray area, and it's a big question you want to be answering with your general counsel. I'll stop here. I think, Dino, if you have any other notes on this.
You basically covered the second page, how to approach this. Yeah, thank you for jumping in. Let's move on. So yeah, how HIPAA has made testing or measuring data that's coming in from platforms more complicated. Well, before HIPAA, we could just open the platform and all the data is there. Number of clicks, impressions, reach, costs of all of them, which conversions have happened on the site. Basically, everything is visible. After HIPAA, if we are in the compliant, let's say the first option, the worst for performance but safest option, uh, everything goes dark after link clicks. We will have some examples afterwards, but yeah, even though conversions are happening on the site, even though your CRM is collecting those conversions and you can see them backend, in this case, Meta is not able to show us those conversions, give us the numbers, tell us where these conversions are coming from or how much are we paying for these conversions. So what is the solution to merging, let's say, this data from Meta and your CRM? So it's a very simple solution. It's adding UTM tracking to all of your ads and using your CRM data to see which campaign ads, ad group, whatever, from where this conversion came from. What does this look like? So what's the preparation, let's say, that you should take? So step one is obviously making sure your CRM is properly set up, that data is flowing correctly, and that you are basically able to collect/process all of this data that's coming to your site. The second thing would be to design your UTM string to give you the data that you care about. Why I use design? That's because UTMs, as I'm sure most of you are familiar with, can be dynamic. You don't have to type out the campaign name or ad name or ad set name inside. You can just give them these dynamic UTM parameters, and anything that you need, you basically can get backend in your CRM. Make sure to add everything that you need in your string in case you don't really know what you need. This is the default UTM string that we use, and it gives it the most important things: campaign, ad set, and ad name. You can also add placements, demographics, other things that you can also look at if you're interested in that. So you basically just add this UTM on ad level. It's a small box on Meta. You just paste it inside. If you're using LinkedIn, last time I checked, UTMs weren't in a separate box. You would just need to add them after the final destination URL, but still dynamic UTMs work there as well. That's it. That's all the preparation that you basically need to go through to set this up. Launch your campaign, test, add, whatever. Give it some time for the data to roll in, and then analyze the data. So this is a very visual example of what HIPAA has done to data afterwards. It's been, let's say, baked. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to use a creative testing example that we ran for a client. That's why you'll notice budgets are very similar between all of them. And this is what that data looks like without the conversions. I would just like to ask you, because this is a very good example of why it's very important to have the full data visible. Just look at these numbers and try to guess which one of these is doing, like, is the best performer. And I'll help you a bit. The definitive best performer on Meta is CPC. So that summarizes the CTR and CPMs. And in theory, whatever has the lowest cost per click means that we are paying the least amount possible to get somebody from Meta to our site. In that case, that would be the ad variable number one, which we are paying 1.8 US per click. It's also got the highest CTR. So the way things look like right now, that should be the best performer. This is what data looks like once we manually add the backend data into the same pivot table in Excel sheets, whatever you use. We manually add the number of add to carts and purchases, use a formula to divide spend and add to carts to get the costs, same for purchases, and then use the conversion rate formula to figure out what's the link to purchase conversion rate. Now that you look at the data, it's very clear that variable number one is one of the worst performers out of all of these creatives. For some reason, that creative doesn't translate well to what's shown on the site, and maybe it's not helping people convert. If you are making the argument, yeah, but still the clicks are the cheapest, just notice the number of conversion all of these variables have, and this is significant. If we had like 3s and 5s in numbers of conversions, then yes, I would value clicks a lot more. But when we have 70, 80 conversions average, it's pretty clear that there are some learnings to be drawn. So as you can see, operating in the dark can lead to very bad decisions. This is only a creative test. This is not necessarily something that is going to make or break your account's performance. However, you would need to employ the same methods to analyze your data for your evergreen campaigns, for your ad sets, for your audience tests, for new markets you're trying to penetrate. And without having the proper data, you're just guessing, basically. It's mostly guesswork. So how do we analyze, how do we get this data together? So after HIPAA guideline changes, we look at the data from two platforms. The part one is Meta, getting the things that we care about, spend being a very important one. Click CPC, we also care about reach impressions. That's the other metrics are basically less important, but you download that data and make sure the time frame is the same as the time frame that you are going to be picking the data from your CRM. You just look at your backend data, whatever CRM you're using, and based on UTM tracking, it's going to tell you how many conversions and which conversions came from each campaign, ad set, ads, whatever it is that you're looking. Run a pivot, get those summaries together, and then you can manually add them in the other table that you're already working for. And that's how you get the full picture. Now, even though we have the full picture of that campaign, let's say after the HIPAA restrictions, we still need to make some considerations. In this case, I would say that you also need to make considerations if you are adopting this option, like the greenest option. So are you valuing clicks or conversions more when you're looking at the data? You may not be in a scenario where you get hundreds of conversions from each variable, each campaign, each ad set. So you may be looking at much less conversions and clicks could weigh a lot more. So the easiest answer to this is if your campaigns are optimizing for clicks, then CPC needs to be weighed more and being looked at as the primary KPI when making decisions on the performance, and then conversions are secondary. If you're optimizing for conversions, it's the other way around. You're looking at CPAs first, the cost per conversion, and then the CPC. The most common question we get is which of these works best? Like everything else with advertising, this is a test you're going to have to run. And unfortunately, after HIPAA, this is a test you're going to have to run multiple times. The easiest way you can make this decision is run a couple of, for the sake of our example, creative tests, and move both the best performers when it comes to CPA and the best performers when it comes to CPC in your evergreen campaigns. Let them spend for a very long period of time, and then look at both backend and front-end data to see what's converting better. This is how you will understand how to analyze the data for your creative tests or any tests per se. if we are having the same discussion when it comes to optimizing your evergreen campaigns, should you optimize for clicks? Should you optimize for conversions or something in between? Once again, you would have to test this. Try to split the test East Coast, West Coast, New York versus Chicago, or whatever DMA or city that you want to test. If you are testing based on state or city or whatever it is you're testing, make sure to add 3 or 4 variables. So if you are testing by city, pick 3 or 4 cities that will be optimizing for link clicks, and then 3 or 4 cities that are going to be optimizing for conversions. Just make sure they are the same size so that the CPMs don't really influence your results. After a while, you'll be able to get an idea of which optimization is working better for you. Even if you get definitive answers that, let's say, optimizing for clicks is resulting in cheaper conversions, you would still need to retest this occasionally. Things change very often on Meta, occasionally, annually, let's say. Things change very often on Meta, and the things that are currently working may not be working tomorrow. So that's just something to keep in mind. What are the downsides of optimizing for either of these two? Well, optimizing for clicks is going to result in much, much, much cheaper clicks, but you are probably going to have much lower link to purchase conversion rates, which means that the quality of the traffic that's coming to the site is most probably going to be lower. If you're optimizing for conversions, you are unfortunately most probably going to be paying premiums in CPMs, and that's going to result in higher CPCs, but that should be higher quality when it comes to the traffic that's coming to the site. The reason you are paying premiums in CPM is because if we are optimizing for conversions and Meta thinks that it's getting 0 conversions, it's just going to label that campaign or ad set or ad as lower performant. The landing page experience will be labeled or ranked as below optimal, and that could result in a slightly higher CPM. Different clients optimize for different things. We have clients that we cannot streamline this, so we are optimizing certain clients for clicks, certain clients for conversions. Some things to take into consideration: how many conversions are you getting weekly/monthly? How expensive is your product? If it's on the more expensive side, it makes sense to go for conversions. If it's on the cheaper side, if it's more affordable, let's say, it would make sense to go for clicks. That comes from the theory that you will find less people to convert for a more expensive product and more people for a cheaper product. But yeah, as I said numerous times until now, test both and see what works best for you. Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't slide over to the proper slide where I was talking about the pros and cons of optimizing for each of this, but yeah, this is the solution. Yeah, so I'll touch a bit on producing creatives ethically, and then I'll add a couple of thoughts about your 3 options. So when it comes to using UGC, a lot of creators have restrictions or clauses. So always be upfront of what the product is for, / who is the final user / what it's going to be used for. Avoid superlatives, cures everything kind of message. I mean, it could work well, but the ethics are obviously discussable. If you are using stock footage, you could be representing your product. Just be mindful of that. This is a very, very important step. Involve your legal team in the creative review. So once you finished your creative, you are happy with your result, make sure somebody from the legal team approves it. Basically, you don't want to have a headache over a simple creative. If the legal team has concerns or wants you to add disclaimers, add them in the primary copy of the ad. Don't add them on the video or image that you're using on the creative element. Don't add them in the headline because Instagram ads don't have headlines. Make sure to add it in the primary text. And finally, be prepared for your ads to be rejected. So I'm certain that most of you know, in this case, Meta needs to white label your account, your product as to be able to advertise. And even if you are, and you've gone through numerous checkups, ads are still gonna get rejected. Yeah, it just happens. There is no going around that. When that happens, appeal, most of the time the bot appeal, let's say, will get it done. If it doesn't, just try to make a very small change. The color of something, just change the text in the headline or the primary text just a bit and try again. That should do a trick. If that doesn't do a trick and you know that you are compliant with whatever the requirements from Meta or whatever platform you are advertising on are, just reach out to the support, make sure to mention you are white labeled, and they should manually approve it. With that, we are almost ready, well, finished with the presentation. Yeah. But before we jump into Q&A, I just wanna add something that Nima already mentioned. When it comes to HIPAA, they still haven't provided clear guidelines on how to run advertising. They still haven't said what you can and can't do clearly. There is a lot of gray areas around here. And obviously, going as white hat as possible, you are going to have, if you don't have the worst results, you are going to have to put in the most amount of work, but you are very likely going to have the worst results. Like the performance is going to be not bad, but worse than the other two options. If you are somewhere in between, tracking certain events, that's a slightly better. If you are going full black hat or legal gray waters, that's also up to you. We cannot give you a recommendation. One, we are not lawyers, but even from a performance advertising standpoint, on which of these solutions you should choose. And the reason why I'm mentioning all of this before the Q&A is because a lot of these questions that you guys have may not be applicable for every product that you have. So different clients or different accounts of different products can use and should use different approaches when it comes to tracking than somebody else. Yeah, that being said, if you guys have any questions, thoughts, shoot, and we'll try our best to give you an answer.
All right. So we got a couple of questions. So one I answered via text, but the question was, does your team help with the technical side of deploying setups for pixel and data? And the answer is yes. We have a growth analytics team that helps with that, either giving specs to your engineers or doing it through other means. There's different products that we can take advantage of. The next question is optimizing for conversions lead to the best sales in general?
Yes. So I'll just take e-commerce an example because that's almost never rejected and never an issue. Optimizing for conversions will give you the best results. Optimizing for clicks will drive a ton of traffic to your site. You may, if you spend 100 US and your product costs 10 US, with 100 US spent on clicks, you should get 150 link clicks, people that came to the site. You shouldn't expect any conversions when it comes to e-com, because e-com is not really about problem solving. It's like, let's just say you're selling headphones. It's more of it's not a necessity. It's a luxury. If you're optimizing for conversions and you spend 100 US and the headphones cost 10 US, you can expect 1, 2, 3, 4 conversions already. You're going to pay 2.5 US per click, not 75 cents. You're going to pay 3 US per click, But out of those 30 people, you expect conversions. And if you don't have conversions, you try to figure out why. Optimizing for clicks, if you get a conversion, you're trying to figure out why you got a conversion based on a clicks campaign. So yeah, optimizing for conversions is the, I'm not going to say preferred, I'm going to say the only way to look at optimizations on Meta.
Yeah. All right, next question is, if relying on UTM tracking, how do you recommend measuring or estimating view-through conversions, ideally without a full-fledged lift test?
This is a very difficult question to answer because I assume that the UTMs should only, the conversion that like the UTMs are showing should only show click-throughs. If somebody converts from a view-through, and you will not basically get the campaign ID, campaign name, ad set ID, ad set name should not be filled out. Depending on how things are set up, if you're tracking first touch and last touch UTMs, which we highly recommend do, use a multi-touch tracking thing on your site. You can like see whether somebody clicked on the ad from Facebook and then converted from somewhere else or not. It's hard. I don't want to say impossible. I'll also let Nima talk about this, but I would say pause the ads, see what happens. And yeah, we aren't fans of those lift tests, but in this case, if that's a concern, they are essential. But do you have any thoughts, Nima?
Yeah, there's a couple of different ways to think about this. There's one is sort of, can you run a lift test on the meta layer? So that means like they have obviously like a lift testing sort of apparatus you can use, or you can do it the old school way is what I call it. You know, marketers back in like the 60s used to do this, and now it's becoming a lot more popular again, which is kind of saying, okay, I'm going to split my ad spend across a similar looking geographies. It's pretty hard to do this in Meta these days because the almost ideal structures is to sort of have everything consolidated. But for if you want to sort of create a business case for view throughs, what you could do is say, okay, I'm spending at a certain rate in New York State, and I'm spending at a certain rate in Chicago or in Illinois, and make a big adjustment in your spend in that geo, and then track the sort of like incremental conversions you're getting in that different state that you increased, and then compare it to the baseline conversions you were getting in the other state, and get a sense of sort of what the lift looks like. The other way you do this, and you know, a lot of marketers do this, is just having a survey at the end of the purchase cycle. So you know, ask people where they came from, how did they hear about you, and so on, and provide them with multiple choice options, and let them pick that, hey, I came from a Facebook ad and so on. What we end up doing is we use these how did you hear about us surveys inside of our attribution model. And so get a sense of, well, we know that on a click basis, Facebook provides X% of the conversions each month. But on a click plus, how did you hear about us survey? Here's like the incremental lift that we're seeing because of Meta, because of Instagram, and so on. So those are the sort of different paths I would take. But you know, don't shy away from a full-fledged lift test. You know, you want to do it sometimes, and we generally recommend incrementality testing in some form, maybe not on Meta, not on platform, but off platform, it can be a pretty good idea. All right, next question is, if you are using paid ads to landing pages, for example, on Bounce, what additional considerations are there for tracking conversions and protecting PII? I can actually take this one on. So, you know, you can think of like Unbounce or other tracking landing pages as part of your website. And so the thing that I would worry more about is not so much the pixel and tracking that is being sent to sort of Meta or Google. It's that Unbounce or Webflow or whatever tool you're using may be actually recording IP addresses of people on their that are landing on your landing page on their end. And that's actually another sort of area for you to think about where data is leaking. And so you either want to call them up and ask them what they're storing and so on. Some of these companies will sign BAAs with you, business associate agreement, where they will sort of guarantee that they're following best practices with storing data, and they're anonymizing it and so on. And if there is a lawsuit that you're involved with, you can actually put them in charge of it and sort of have them defend their position on how they're tracking stuff. So I would worry a lot more about that part, the ambient data that they might be sort of like consuming without thinking that it's a problem because of specifically this IP address issue. But when it comes to pixel tracking and conversion tracking, I would think about those just as an extension of your site. And depending on which one of these paths we discussed you pick, you can do the same thing on the landing pages. So if you're going to have a pixel on, let's say, unauthenticated pages, the unbound pages, the landing pages would fall under that category of pages. And so you can sort of take it on that way. But you ideally want to be signing a BAA with all of your providers. So, almost all the tracking providers now, all the analytics providers, all the database providers are willing to sign BAAs. It does cost more money. They found a way to make it a revenue stream for themselves. It really doesn't change much for them, unfortunately. They just know that you need it, so they have to pay for it. So, but they're willing to sign it. The tools that don't let you sign it is the ad networks and some of the analytics tools like Google Analytics, but Amplitude, Mixpanel, Snowflake, Segment, RudderStack, FreshPaint, all of these sort of tools that you can use for tracking and analytics infrastructure are pretty much on par with signing BAAs. All right, well, that was all the questions. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to send a recording and the slides, maybe without this joke that Dino has in the bottom of this last slide. But we're going to send them over to you with a recording of everything. Really appreciate you all joining today. And again, we do paid search and paid social. So if you want help with thinking through these things, please reach out. I know a couple of you messaged already wanting to speak to us. So we'll take it from there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.